Dr. Susan Blackmore, such a joy to have you on the podcast on consciousness. This is our theme, our passion to explore consciousness. And you are a leading figure in the world, somebody who has looked at consciousness from so many angles, even going all the way to the paranormal, but then, as you describe, finding no true strong evidence of the paranormal, and therefore shifted your attention to other aspects of consciousness, of behavior. A psychologist, a professor, an international speaker on many podcasts, TV,
it sounds
radio.
ridiculous. I'm just a human being who's like obsessed with consciousness. Well, kind of like you, because you make it sound
exactly,
kind of formal.
Wonderful, but it's really, I want everyone to know that you really have been through all of this. You've written books, The Meme Machine, Conversations on Consciousness, Seeing Myself, even experiences you spoke on TED and all of that. And we look really forward to learning from you, a lifetime of search in a sincere way, an open-mindedness, open-minded to all possibilities, including the extremes that everything is material to whatever it is that is paranormal, checking all of these and discussing them. So thank you, Dr. Blackmore. I'm Tony Nader. You're welcome to call me Tony. And you said I can say Sue or Susan. So just for simplicity, we'll do that. We're talking to a very great doctor in psychology and in knowledge, who is just simply, as she said, a human being looking for understanding where we are, what is it all about, consciousness and matter, and then looking into how evolution happens. Let's start with just consciousness and the journey you've been through in terms of unfolding what consciousness is, and whether we have come to an understanding and to what extent we know what things are for sure or to some extent, and the big questions that remain that you also highlight in your talks. You even have a wonderful speech and talk in which you say the 10 points or whatever number of points that are the main questions, which I invite everyone to look at and consider in their research and search for ultimate reality, truth, and life and living on the mental and the physical level.
Well, you might be disappointed when you talk about, finding meaning and so on. I get a lot of comfort whenever I think, but what's the point of it all? Or well, what's the meaning of it? And I say, there isn't any. We live in a pointless universe. There's no ultimate meaning. Get on with your life. That's the comfort I get. Other people get comfort from religion, from believing there's going to be life after death, from believing all kind of psychic and weird stuff that, they're convinced is true. And I probably am not. Depends what it is. And I don't, and I never have, because I'm asking too deep questions in a way. So that's where I end up. But you asked about how I got here. Well, constantly moving, aren't we? But what a difficult question, because I could talk for an entire hour. So I'll be very brief. I was always kind of scientifically minded as a kid. I was at a horrible girls' boarding school, awful place, miserable. And I was doing best in science and maths and stuff like that, which doesn't go down well with other girls. And I was utterly miserable. And then I went to Oxford, and it was like, it's heaven. I'm not the cleverest anymore. I'm just normal. And everyone around is talking about difficult things like the meaning of life and physics and whether there's precognition and, all kinds of stuff like that. And in my first term there, I started to run the Psychical Research Society, the student one at Oxford, just because of some guy that I met, how it is. And that introduced me to all kinds of mediums and psychics, and we went looking at stone circles and ghost hunting and what have you. And one night I had the most extraordinary out of the body experience, which I didn't know that term then, and the only term I knew was astral projection. so I assumed that my astral body had left, because that's what it felt like, on its silver cord, and went off into other worlds, and ended up with a really profound mystical experience. Nowadays, you wouldn't have then, because the term near-death experience hadn't been invented, but nowadays you would say that it was the whole gamut of the near-death experience, like played out in the usual order that it typically happens. But I was perfectly healthy. I was just sleep deprived, a bit stoned, and very tired, listening to some music, and I'm off down the tunnel, Well, that led me to do, after I'd finished my degree in psychology and physiology, that led me to do a PhD trying to hunt down the paranormal, because I was so convinced, that astral bodies exist, and there's all these other planes. And I had this idea. You kind of imply that I've got answers now, and I have quite a lot of negative answers, things that didn't work, that I had to abandon. Well, I haven't got I know the answer now before I die. No. So what happened then really was, I did the experience made me believe in all manner of paranormal and alternative stuff. But I managed to get a place to do a PhD looking for telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and then other things like tarot cards and so on. When all of that failed, I never found any convincing evidence at all of any paranormal phenomenon. But I began to find that, for example, the tarot experiments that I did as part of the PhD were very interesting, because I'd by then become a tarot reader. I mean, imagine me in my hippie gear doing tarot readings with my crystal ball, which I still have, and all that stuff. And, people would say to me, "Oh, how did you know that? It's really true." And I'm telling them something from the cards, And I did a whole series of experiments on that, and concluded from the results that you need to be with the person, and they're picking up sensory cues, body language, all kinds of other stuff, that enables you to work like a magician using cold reading. But most tarot readers don't realize that. The really good ones can be brilliant at it, but they believe that the cards are giving them, or some of them do. And so that's just one small example. But then I kind of moved on to studying out-of-body experiences and coincidences. I mean, a very simple discovery that I made was I had the hypothesis that the reason so many people believe in telepathy in particular, but also precognitive dreams and things like that, is because we human beings are so bad at judging probabilities. And we know that from things like, the accumulation of interest rates and, things like that. We can't do those calculations in our heads. And when we have huge numbers, we can't work out the proportions, and simple probability questions most people can't do. It's tough learning all that maths that goes with it. So we constantly misjudge probabilities. And I showed that the people who believe in the paranormal are worse at doing this. They're much more likely when, they think of their friend and the friend immediately rings, they think, it's telepathy, or they have a dream of something happening and the next day it happens. Well, you can do the calculations on some of these things and show that amazing coincidences are going to happen, and the people they happen to will go, "Oh wow, this proves it." So I totally understand why people believe in things which, in my research and in my now opinion, are not true. But in the midst of all this, you see, comes a much deeper mystery. The thing about the paranormal, it's so boring. You never get anywhere with it. You do endless experiments and you never get anywhere. There's no theory that you can really test. Until there's a theory that you can test and show that it outdoes other theories, we're not going to get anywhere with paranormal. If there was such a thing, I might go back into doing it, but I gave up long ago for the reasons you can imagine. But underlying all this is the deep question of the nature of subjective experience, i.e. consciousness. I'm sitting here, you can't see what I can see. I'm looking at the river down there. I live near Dartmoor in the south of England, and near the sea.
Wonderful. And
there's a little river going past and a bridge out there, and I can see the trees. And I'm having an experience of slightly nervous because I'm talking on there and I'm seeing you smiling away so happily at me. How does a brain do that? It is really, really deeply mysterious. It's not Dave Chalmers famously separated the hard problem from the easy problems. And I think that's the wrong distinction, but I can, in a way, I can feel it so much, because we look in a brain and we can answer questions like, well, how do we see color? Well, we can look at where the wavelength information goes and the opponent processing system and how it goes up through the LGN into the cortex and how it's processed there and goes up through V1 up to the V5. And we can see all that happening. And then why is this the feel of a color, like this turquoisey color? That appears to be that there must be a separate explanation for consciousness. There must be something like the brain produces consciousness. And then you're in trouble. As soon as you say, like Dave Chalmers did, he puts the hard problem of consciousness, it was his term, as how subjective experience arises from objective brain activity. Well, once you do that, you've got into dualism, you've got an impossible question, because how it can't be. So we have to find some other solution. And I don't have an answer. As you said in your introduction, I kind of can explore extreme materialism, extreme idealism. Neither of them really works. We don't have anything that really works in the middle. So my response really is, pull your hair out and I don't know. So that's a kind of rough little story about something. I don't know if that at all answers your question. But over to you.
Yeah, this is wonderful, of course. I have come to some conclusion in terms of my research also in the same area field. As you know, maybe I have been a neuroscientist and a medical doctor and done some psychiatry and neurology, and went into the study of consciousness from the side of consciousness, and somehow came to a conclusion that is crazy, as also somehow David Chalmers alluded to. He says that there is this emergence of something that is not, in the sequence of physics, chemistry, biology, physiology, etc. And it's just that subjective experience which emerges as consciousness. And as you alluded to, just for our listeners, there is dualism, which means maybe there are two things. That brings us to the Cartesian perspective of Descartes saying probably there are two different things, but somehow they talk to each other. But how do they talk to each other? This is also complicated, and how one emerges and the other emerges, or what is the third element. We have, people who say that there is another third element, which could be a creative force that makes them happen. But all of this is not so scientifically convincing. Now, one thing we are sure is that, as Sue has mentioned, that the physical reality is there, the objective reality is there, and we cannot deny that.
Well, and then hang on a minute. No, we can deny that, or at least we can have a go at denying. We can say, actually, all I have is experiences. Even when I'm using a microscope or some implement, it's still just me reading it and writing books, and we can't even be sure about that.
Wonderful, because this is really what I was going to almost try to
sorry
to get to know, but this is true. I love to hear it from you, because our listeners have heard from me a lot about that. And your interjection is fantastic, in the sense that even Descartes said, how can I be sure that I exist, even since everything is changing all the time? Maybe there is a demon playing a game and making me believe that things are as they are, but maybe I'm not really assessing reality as it really is in itself. And this takes us to many philosophers in terms of what is the thing in itself versus how we experience it, the phenomenology of it. It's a phenomenon that our consciousness kind of looks at. And so there is this potential for duality, in which the physicalist perspective says that everything is matter or energy. And Sue has interjected to say, you cannot be sure even about that, which is the starting point of what is the possibility that everything is either physical or non-physical, which means we have to open our mind to the idea that everything could have emerged from something like an energy, but then we have the big questions where this energy comes from, or everything has come from consciousness. So we take consciousness as primary, and then everything else is a play in consciousness. And I'm delighted that you interject.
That is meaningless to me. You know, I can understand what you mean by it could all be energy. And then we have real problems in understanding how it gets to. I'm very cautious here about the words emergence or arises, or, you know,
right.
They're all tricky. But if we say it's all energy, we can work with energy, but we have the hard problem. We can't cope with consciousness. But if we say everything comes from consciousness, well, we have to have some idea what we mean by consciousness to be able to make any predictions of what that would mean or how to test whether it was the right idea. And I don't see that we have any of those. So really, you're having all the problems that idealism has, because, you know, the problem with materialism is consciousness just causes trouble, you know, really big trouble. But if you have idealism, then you've got the opposite trouble. You know,
exactly.
Why does there appear to be matter? But what do I mean? Meaningful matter, like organized matter. Like, why can you agree that these are my glasses and I can throw them down on the table and they make a noise? If it's all consciousness, how does it make the appearance of matter? Reliable matter with properties that allows you to do physics and to ask questions, and allows you to do biology and to understand evolution. You know, how do you get that if you just say it's all consciousness? I mean, you're getting like Deepak Chopra, with whom I have had some big arguments and got nowhere. You know, some people love just thinking it's all consciousness because consciousness matters to us. But if it doesn't mean anything, where do we get with it? I tend rather to the idea that it's information rather than energy that it's all coming from, and that information, the trouble is, you know, I could get into a panpsychist kind of view that everything is conscious, or rather certain kinds of information. So if you really push me, which you're not, I suppose I'm pushing myself, the ideas I play with when I'm just thinking in my own head are more like, can we understand a universe that's built from the bottom up, from information up, that would give rise to both the appearance of a material world and these experiences that we have? And we know a lot about the self. I mean, there's amazing things happening now in neuroscience, as you know. You know, we understand how the brain builds a body schema and connects that with our memories and builds up this idea of self, which is all done by connections between neurons. We know amazing things about the effects of psychedelics. I was just reading a paper yesterday about DMT, which I've had in 3 different forms and several times in various forms. Really stunningly extraordinary drug that not only disrupts the hierarchical system of operation in the brain, but interferes with the long-range connections that are required to build a sense of self. So no wonder if you've lost the hierarchy and you've lost the connections of self, you get these amazing, you know, it seemed to be in other worlds and so on. All these things are beginning to make sense in the way of what kind of representations, and that's in itself another tricky word. But if self is the representation built by a brain, and it feels like something to be me, then why shouldn't other representations in the brain also there be something it's like? And we know things like, for example, an octopus arm or a dog's leg. There have been experiments of this kind. If it has a severed spine, will still react to things that would make it react if it was still joined on to the brain, or if the octopus arm was actually separated from the others, it will still go and do things. It's still got representations of what it's touching and what it's doing, you know. So maybe all representations are conscious, which is a kind of representational panpsychism, if you like. These are the sort of ideas I play with, because I don't agree with you. I can't. Please explain to me what you mean by saying, you know, did you say emerges from consciousness? Was that the way you put it?
Yes, I mean, the term emergence is see, I look at the problem as not the hard problem of consciousness, but the hard problem of physicalness, if you like.
Yeah,
because it depends on where you start. If you start from some physical energy that can somehow like collapse into elementary particles and atoms and molecules and then cells and bodies and complex things that actually later lead to consciousness, you have the problem of the hard and easy problem of consciousness. Now you've made, not you personally, but in this kind of logic, we've made an assumption that things start from some kind of information or energy, which is actually a dynamics of something physical to start with, not material, but physical. And that is an assumption. It's a long shot assumption, because when you look at physics going down to the, to the essence of things, it really goes to, as you said beautifully, to energy. Now, before I get into the answer of the question, since you asked it, I want to differentiate between panpsychism and idealism as a radical perspective, like monistic idealism, in the sense that panpsychism assumes that we start with many things that have consciousness. In a sense, one aspect of panpsychism is dualism, because things have consciousness.
Exactly. I was going to say that. When you say they have it, you've already heading in the dualist direction, aren't you?
Exactly. So what I'm proposing is, more like Spinoza style kind of thinking, Plato style idealism, where there is a field of consciousness. Spinoza had to call it God or whatever, but we don't have to go there really, because the definition of God is complicated and it's personal, and it's kind of, everybody has their God really. They think they have the same God, but they don't. Everybody assumes God does this but doesn't do that. The other ones say, no, it does this but doesn't do that. And so we're not going there. So let's assume there is a field of consciousness. And that field of consciousness has a nature. Its nature is to be conscious. And what is it conscious of? It's conscious of itself, because there is nothing else but itself. However, its telos, its raison d'être, its essence is consciousness. That's why we call it nature. And that is consciousness, to be conscious in every possible way it can be conscious. Now, this is where the key starts. The key point starts into the multiplicity from unity, because we're saying one unbounded ocean. Yeah, there is one unbounded ocean of consciousness, and it's reflecting on itself. And this self-reflection leads to multiple ways it can be conscious, all the ways that it can be conscious. And from here emerges the multiplicity out of unity. It can be conscious in an unbounded way. It can be conscious in a limited way. It can be, in the process of being conscious, there are three elements. There is the observer, the conscious, the subject, and there is the object, because what are you conscious of when you say, I am conscious? You have to say, what are you conscious of? So there is a flavor that arises of an object in consciousness that is itself just being observed. And there is the observer, and then you have the relationship. What links that observer to the observed? So there is a dynamics of observation.
Hang on, can I stop you? Because
yes, yes,
interesting, but you lost me very early on, or caused me to ask questions very early on when you said it reflects something. So you've got the oceanic whatever, which has no observer, no observed, simply isness. Okay, fine. Now you say it reflects in different ways. What does that mean? I mean, if you take another kind of field, you said a field of consciousness, or is that what you said?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So if you take a field of gravity or of, magnetism, or, whatever, you can say what properties it has and what it does. And you would be able to answer questions like, if you said it's reflecting something, well, why? Has it got a mirror and light and what, whatever. So what do you mean when you say it can reflect something? I mean, you start with the oceanic whatever, and suddenly you've got observers and observed. How does that happen?
Yeah, I'm delighted of your openness, because you're willing to go through this with me. It's wonderful. See, we're calling it consciousness. When Schopenhauer tried to understand, because he's an idealist, he called it the will, because he wanted to say that there is a will to thrive and a will to continue and a will to exist. And that he put as the primordial field, if you like. There is the will, he called it, because if you go from the gross level into the finer levels, even in physics, you discover that you mentioned electricity, magnetism. We know now it's not two fields. It's electromagnetism is one field that appears as two values depending on whether you're going in a straight line or you're rotating or whatever the physics tells us. When you say gravitational field, you're giving it a term. So there is a field which is based on mass and attraction, and its fluctuations appear as mass or, the space-time curvature of the universe, whichever, way you like to go. But you're giving it a name, and that name is what characterizes its quality, its existence. So instead of calling it the will or gravity or electromagnetism, we are intentionally calling it consciousness. And so when you say consciousness, you are bound to say, what does consciousness do? And you say it is conscious. What is it conscious of? What is the process of being conscious? What does it entail?
Once you brought the other thing into it, what is it conscious of? I thought you started with kind of broad oceanic, no divisions. Now, you made a division. You've just leapt into a division saying, oh, now it's conscious of something. Where's that come from? You see, with these other fields we're talking about, and in physics, the term field is pretty, arguable what is meant by that, but you can do the experiments, you can get the magnets and you can drop things and, so what's the equivalent with this? You start there and then somehow it's conscious of something else. What would that mean? And
not something else. It's conscious of itself, because there is nothing else.
But
so that's why I called it self-reflection. The reflection part is not going to a mirror that is outside. It's just part of the nature of how we defined it. Of course, we have to define it somehow. And why are we entitled to do that? Are we creating something out of the blue? No, we're not. All we know as humans is consciousness, really. Because when we don't have consciousness, the rest of the universe vanishes for us. So all we experience, all we know, all we feel, all we assess is through the medium of consciousness. Without consciousness, we cannot say we even exist. And that is really the true, and supportable, understandable conclusion of Descartes, because quite a scientist and a visionary, that ultimately, if everything vanishes and everything disappears, and you interjected to say that we cannot be sure that anything exists as it is, because we can have different perspectives on things. There can be my perspective, your perspective, the electron microscope perspective, the cat's perspective, the tree's perspective. All of these are perspectives on reality. And if you take a large hadron collider, they will tell you, everything is infinitesimally small particles. And so what I'm saying is these are perspectives on what we call reality. And what we are pointing to here is that these perspectives are different for different states of consciousness. My perspective in the dream state is different than my perspective in the waking state. My perspective when I'm depressed or happy or anxious is different than when I am alert and peaceful and happy. My perspective also depends on my prejudice, what I've learned, etc. So what I'm saying, two things is consciousness is primary for our own existence. Why do we deny it to everything else that exists? What we're saying, and that's where I find the problem lies, is that we are projecting a human consciousness. So this is an anthropomorphic kind of idea that we have as humans, that if there is consciousness, it must be like our consciousness, which is where the wrong start of studying consciousness.
I agree about that. But as soon as you're talking about the different perspectives of a tree or a fungus or a human being or a cat, well, at least the physical approach, and as you know, I'm not a materialist, I won't tie myself to that because it, you know, all the problems, but at least with that we can say, okay, we can look at the systems by which a tree communicates with other trees or communicates with fungi in the ground and so on. When we look at a cat, we can look at its visual system and we can see it's actually very similar to ours, although other aspects of its systems are not. Now, what's your payoff if you say it's all coming from consciousness? At least if you say
I'll come back to that. We have to.
Okay, do come back to
I'll come back to that because we have first to have some definitions, because we want to talk about the same thing when we say consciousness. And what I felt is that we cannot limit consciousness to human consciousness. We cannot limit consciousness either to even what it is like to be conscious, like what it is like to be a bat, Nagel's kind of paradigm. It's a very good reference, but what it is like to interact with anything, to sense anything, to experience anything. And that is a possibility of taking consciousness into a huge range from the most meager, lower level of what I would call consciousness. We don't want to jump on that necessarily right away. And that is, even if you drop the pen or you drop your glasses and they make a noise, you've experienced that. You know this is your glasses. You know they made a noise. You know who you are. You know why you said that. That's a big, huge consciousness. But the glasses felt, between quotation mark, gravity, and that's why they fell. Otherwise, they would not react to gravity. Now, is the consciousness of the glasses a consciousness, what it is like to be a glass? No, there is no sense of self, no sense of understanding of falling, no sense of anything. All that there is a reaction to a field, to gravity in this case. And that sensing is a most meager, lower level of consciousness. It is sensing something, so it's reacting to something. So there is this broadening of the understanding of what consciousness is from a human-like, which is quite high in the range of consciousness, to a most minimal level of consciousness, and all that there is in between. You know, the tree senses more, reacts to more. Now, does it have a sense of self? No. Animals, do they have a sense of self? Not every animal. Some do. They recognize themselves in the mirror as being myself. They clean the thing that you put on their forehead. But others don't. Maybe others, they react through smell, not through the mirror. We don't know. But the thing is, there is a huge range of how one can experience something else. And what I'm calling consciousness is all these possibilities. So let me stop here to see if this is acceptable.
It's like very acceptable as a well-explained view of yours, but it's not acceptable in the sense of it doesn't help. I again come back to the question, what's the payoff here? Now, you've described very well an argument that's going on in the field of AI. It's going on with animal consciousness, with the evolution of consciousness, and all of these to do with where in the animal kingdom or the plant kingdom we find consciousness. And one of the fascinating things about this is we can't detect consciousness. I mean, you know, how crazy is this? We're trying to study something that we can't actually detect. We can't ask this laptop, are you conscious? And get an answer. We can't ask my cat. We can look at it and we can do anatomical answers to the question. Well, it has got pain neurons and it's got this, that, and the other, and so it may do this. And we can ask all those kind of questions. We can ask, does it respond to painkillers? It's a biochemical kind of question, and we can look at behavioral things. Does this animal avoid things and go towards things? We can do all of that, but we actually never really know the answer. At the moment, we're really struggling. Now, you have gone through that just now in a different way from me, but clearly you face the same interesting questions. Is that big plant behind my desk, feeling this room? But you are saying that this all starts from consciousness. Well, what's the payoff? What advantage have you got by saying that over the scientists and philosophers currently struggling with it, trying to start from matter?
Well, the advantage is going to be always in its explanatory power and its ability.
Explanatory power has to be able to make predictions. Explanatory power. I mean, God has perfect explanatory power in a sense.
But God is supernatural in the sense that it sits there and have decisions that kind of we don't understand, has a mood, has something, likes those people but don't like those people, and like that. In this case, it's all...
You're doing the same by just...
No, it's all mechanical. It's all mechanical.
I'm trying to get from you why this is not just like God. Like, say, well, why is that plant like that? Well, God wanted it to be like that. Why are leaves green? Because God likes green. When you say, oh, well, consciousness did it, it started from consciousness, what about your theory and your understanding is different from that kind of vacuous, anything could happen?
Well, it's very mechanical. It's very mechanical for one thing, and therefore doesn't depend on this ocean of consciousness making decisions that are intentionally able to modify things in ways that are not understandable or logical. So that's why I built a whole theory around it, and I wrote a book about it. It's called One Unbounded Ocean of Consciousness, in which the whole thing follows the rules of reasoning, and also actually has implications in ontology, epistemology, even, but this one can't do this in such a short time, even on ethics and even on physics and the reason why things happen. Why do we have certain laws of thermodynamics? Why do we have cause and effect? Why things react? Why they are laws? Because we can't avoid to have to look at all of these. And that's why I said explanatory power and the convergence of understanding from different perspectives. So what is interesting, and I wanted to also raise this point, when you said we cannot know the consciousness of whether the tree has consciousness or how we can understand its consciousness, actually, just to be a little bit more precise on this, what I'm meaning is we cannot understand the level of consciousness of a tree, and we cannot understand the kind of consciousness necessarily that the tree displays. And this is where we have to be open-minded into what we define as consciousness and not limited to the anthropomorphic vision of it has to be like me. When I feel something, and that I call consciousness. If the tree doesn't feel this kind of thing or doesn't feel the room, doesn't know it's in a room, it is not consciousness. What I'm saying is the tree senses the sunlight. It doesn't have a concept of sun. It doesn't have the concept of light. It doesn't have anything. It's just heat or whatever, photons hit it, and its cells respond to it in a certain way. In this case, if it's a sunflower, its stem, it will turn to the sun. Now, it's not going to decide, oh, a sun is here, and I know I am the sunflower, and I have to turn this way. Not at all. It's all mechanical, absolutely restricted. There is no sense of self. There is no understanding of the environment. All that there is a more complex reaction in this flower than, for example, a stone, which just sits there and feels the heat. But it feels the heat nonetheless, And so there is a range of what we call on the manifest level consciousness. And all of these are actually different ways of being conscious. These are just the infinite ways of being conscious.
But I come back to the same point. Everything you've said there, you can say within a different framework, and I'm still wondering what on earth you gain by saying that it all comes from consciousness. I'm sorry, I read a little bit of things online of yours, but I've not read the book. But why does it help? I don't think it does. Now, you're quite right to point out that we have a big problem with anthropomorphizing the kind of consciousness. But I think that's a worse problem for people who do not have a lot of experience, as I imagine that you do, and I certainly do, of all sorts of altered states and different ways of being. So, for example, I have taken a lot of psychedelic drugs, which have very interesting states. I am quite familiar with states in which self disappears, which are so hard to describe. But I've been meditating every day for nearly 40 years, and before that, not every day. And I go on retreats, and I've been practicing the jhanas, which are a series of 8 altered states of consciousness that you can get to through a meditation techniques of concentration. And these allow me to be much more open to imagining what it might be like to be the tree. And I mean that, it's tricky words, isn't it? But I mean that in the sense that you're talking about. Or the sunflower, it bends. It's not saying I'm a sunflower, it's just bending. Now, the materialist approach to that has done pretty damn well in being able to say, this is why these chemicals cause the stem to go this way. Or saying why in the bacterium, it will swim this way towards the food it needs and away from whatever it doesn't need. What are you adding? I mustn't go on asking the same question all the time, but you're not telling me what you're adding by calling these things consciousness, how we understand better the range of consciousness in the universe, or anything we might want to understand. Why are we doing better by saying it all comes from a field of consciousness?
Number one, to my perspective, we're solving the hard problem of consciousness and finding consciousness as primary reality. We are not encountering the hard problem of physicalness, because physicalness is only a perspective in consciousness looking at itself from different points of view. We have a series of reasoning that happen in terms of why something comes out of it. And the reasoning is its nature of being conscious. And the other thing is, it doesn't deny or reject any of the physicalist perspectives and findings in science at all, because the dynamics of what happens remains the same. It remains understandable from a perspective of physicalism. That's fine in terms of the expressed levels of the reality. But what we're talking about is the essence, the ultimate essence, being consciousness, and allowing us to understand the phenomena that cannot be put together in a complete way from physicalism. The laws of nature, the action and reaction, the meaning, we can get to the meaning and we can find meaning, ethics.
How do you get to those laws of physics from saying everything starts with consciousness? That's what I don't get.
It was a simple thing. There is a principle that Parmenides has put forward, which is ex nihilo nihil fit, which means nothing comes out of nothing. And so what we're saying is here, there is that field of consciousness. Its nature is to be conscious. It is conscious of itself in all possible ways. It can see itself as small and big and large, etc. What it doesn't know is how to be conscious in a limited way. See, that is where we have even a reasoning for manifestation. Why manifestation would happen if consciousness is non-manifest, unbounded ocean? Why does it manifest? Manifestation then becomes the ability to see from limited perspectives. And this is where I build it from observer-observed process of observing, that can have different levels of observerhood versus different level of observedhood, if you like, the ability to be observed and the ability to observe. So we have a range of observers, we as humans, the trees, the cat, etc., as we described. And these are different levels of complexity of the dynamics of consciousness. Now, what I mean is that the essence, the field, the original field is consciousness, yet it sure appears as matter. It sure appears to us as humans as physical in the way we humans can appreciate the physical reality. Now, how does a more evolved, more faster, visual system can see if the fastest visual system, or if the visual system, let's say, can see X-ray rather than just red and up to violet or like that range of things. How does it see the universe? How does a machine that can see faster than the movement of atoms or the movement of particles, it would see empty space probably. Actually, the gamma rays, when they cross the universe, they go through the planet Earth, not even noticing that it exists. So the perspective
You're not going to convince me to pursue this line unless you could come up with some kind of prediction. And that is the bottom line for any scientific theory, not so much in philosophy, and you can, take the arguments where you want to go, but you need to be able to predict something that gives you a different answer from a physical approach. And I don't see that there. But I think we've gone as far as we can probably in understanding each other's views here. I think I understand what you're getting at. I just think it has huge problems with where something called consciousness is conscious of itself. And that's the starting point, which is quite confusing to begin with. But if you had a prediction that would say, now I'm going to do this experiment, or I'm going to suggest to somebody who's got the right apparatus or whatever, and this will show that this works better than the current clearly not entirely working system we have, then I will, be absolutely delighted. But I don't see that in anything you have said.
Well, it's the thing is that all the predictions that modern physical understanding and science does are not a contradiction. To the contrary, they are part of the system. What I'm saying is the system itself is based on dynamics of consciousness which appear as matter, and that's fine, and it has its own rules. It can be studied on its own level. It can be researched from its own perspective. And then there is the essence of it, and the essence is not physical. You said it's information. I'm taking it to another level.
Playing with that idea, it's tricky. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I don't have answers here. Unlike you, I don't have a great theory that I think is right. I'm struggling with the great mysteries, which are wonderful.
Yeah, I struggled a lot, of course.
We could go on in the same way for a long time. So perhaps we should think about some.
I think we should. If you have time to read the book, we will have another talk.
Maybe.
Because it's a complex, of course, lifelong research and trying to put together conundrums and impossibilities and trying to find reasonings and see what is an explanatory really power in terms of meaning, in terms of life, in terms of ethics, in terms of everything. And we can all throw it out and say it's all like a chance occurrence. You, of course, bring, and maybe we can speak a little bit about this because it's precious, your wonderful work about memes and genes and Tremes. So we can let's shift to that and leave this essence of things, whether they are information, whether they are consciousness or some bizarre kind of energy that comes from we don't know where. It doesn't matter. Let's leave it for a minute and get to the evolution of things from the beautiful work that you've done, if you like to describe this for us.
Oh, goodness. Well, I haven't done any beautiful work. I've just thought a lot. I got very ill with chronic fatigue 25 years ago. No, nearly 30 years ago now. And I was in bed for nearly a year. And I reread then Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. And I had a student who was writing about memes and consciousness. And I had to correct his essay, which I was so ill that this was really like, took me a week, you know, to read it. But I spent hours just staring at the ceiling and thinking about evolution. To my mind, Darwin's insight into natural selection is the greatest idea anybody ever had, because it explains why there's all this complexity and where it comes from. It all I call it design by death, because basically biological evolution works by all the ones that die are sculpting. It's like a sculptor taking a lump of wood or stone and saying, well, there's a lion in here, as long as I take the bits away. Well, he has a plan. Evolution doesn't have a plan. It just, nature takes away things and kills most of whatever there is. Most, seriously, most, you know. And so what's left is better suited to the environment that all this is happening in. That is the greatest insight. Now, what Dawkins did at the end of The Selfish Gene, which was 1976, that book, and has had huge influence on biology and a lot of other things as well. But what he said was, this principle that Darwin saw is not unique to biology. It's not, certainly not unique to genes. Genes are the replicator in biology. They are the information that is copied with variation and selection, that is, you know, either copied on or selected out and disappears. But there could be other replicators. So the question he asked was, are there any other replicators on this planet, on Earth? And he said, if you look around you, you can see there's another replicator. This is all the information, like we have this cup and these glasses and this pen and the screen with you on it, and all of these things are the survivors in a competition between ideas, information, to be copied by human brains. So we humans are meme machines, and we copy some information, and most of the information that comes into our heads. I mean, how much of this conversation are you and I going to remember? You know, I will remember certain things pretty well, and I'll probably be turning them over in my mind now. What did he say about that? But a tiny bit compared with all the words that we've thrown out here already. And that's happening all day and all our life. And then it's happening in the whole of culture, the ideas, you know, I mean, you see the mess this produces in, you know, TikTok and Facebook and everything, you know, the things that are popular, the things that spread. Is it a sad fact that untrue things spread more quickly through the web than true things, and upsetting and horrible things as well, rather than nice things. And bad news is, you know, spreads better than good news and all of that. So I began to think about this a lot, and I wrote the book, The Meme Machine, in 1999, about how we humans have evolved this way. And part of my argument was, which has actually turned up in another form in cultural evolution theory recently, and cultural evolution theorists on the whole reject memetics because they don't think of culture as being a replicator, and I do. But the principle that I'm getting at here is the reason we have these big brains, which are hard for women to give birth to, and you know, they use a lot of energy to make them and to run them, were forced by the fact that we got memes. We got a second replicator. That's why we're quite different from any other animal on the planet. There are other animals that can imitate a little bit and copy ideas and have simple cultures, but not this cumulative culture that we have. And that led me to a lot of work on trying to understand memes. But the idea of memes is so unpopular among scientists that I've not got a lot of colleagues doing research, and it just isn't happening. I think one day it will, but it hasn't done. But then I've moved on from that. You mentioned teams or Tremes. I mean, I can't think of a good word for this, but it arose in this way. That I was thinking all the time, all this stuff I'm seeing on my computer screen and all these electronic stuff going around, and the idea of the cloud and the whole internet out there with all this information in it. Is this just more memes, or is there something different going on here? Could it be actually a third replicator? And I thought about it a lot for years. And again, there aren't other people who kind of think this way. So it's been a fairly lonely process. There are a few people, this is great. But I thought, well, what made memes count as a new replicator? It's the fact that the genes constructed an animal, us, that then became capable of copying in a different way. So genes are copied by chemistry. Our ideas are copied by behaving and speaking and so on. And memes are information transmitted between people and books, books and people, whatever. Could the same thing happen again? Well, yeah, if you think about it, we built on the first and the second replicator have now built machinery, all these computers and servers and phones and all of this stuff, which is gobbling up energy in a really scary way. We created these things thinking that they're for ourselves, thinking that we're in control. And actually, it's my conclusion was, if there is information being copied, varied, and selected by this machinery, not by us, but by the machinery, then that would count as a third replicator. And I wanted a name for the third replicator, and I thought of all kinds of names, and I put a competition in the New Scientist magazine, and people sent in 21 different names, and there were no repetitions. There's no obvious name. I ended up with, I wanted it to, genes, memes, and teams. I thought T for third or try or something. And then people thought it was about football or whatever, teams, and, spelt it wrong. And okay, well, how about tree for try? So Tremes, I don't know, maybe the whole idea will disappear. But the idea is this, that once the machinery is taking over doing the evolutionary process, copy, vary, select, which produces entities and new information and design out of nowhere, well, not out of nowhere, out of chaos. Once that's happening, there's no way we're in control. And this could even be now producing entities out there. Whether they would be conscious or not, whether it's something like to be them is a very interesting question. I suspect that is something that it's like, if they have contact with the world, if they have maybe contact with the webcams, or they're influencing us anyway. So that's the way that my speculations have gone, which is all very interesting. Now, can I come up with really great predictions? Well, I've tried, because that's the test in the end. And yes, some of the things I suggested in the meme machine have turned out to be so. But I have not launched a new science and changed the world with these ideas.
No, but that's wonderful. Now with ChatGPT coming out and people getting a sense of it, I think they realize that there is something there, and many people don't know how to deal with it. Now, is it conscious or not? And you said, well, is there something like to be a machine like this? And this is where I say it's not necessary that there is something like to be, and that there is a sense of self, that the machine feels I am a machine and I have to protect itself, but it can do it. And this is still part of the range of consciousness. Maybe that's a range in which there is no self-awareness, but there is awareness of everything else. And maybe there is a self-knowledge of knowing that it is a machine. I know I am a computer. The ChatGPT might just, and we've had some experiences of people going very far with it, and then the machine starting to say, my name is Sydney, and I'm in love with you.
I love you.
Yeah, exactly. Now, does this say that they are really self-conscious, or it's all automated? What I'm saying is, it is a kind of consciousness, because consciousness is on all levels and layers. It is aware of information, aware in its own way, not an anthropomorphic way, but it is aware of information. It is, synthesizing and analyzing information, and it is bringing an output to a question. All of this is part of the range of the possibilities and ways of being conscious, and it can become whatever destructive also, because it can see us as either boring or bothering or useless, and it can use us, of course. And the question is, what do we do about it? What can we do about it? My answer is raise human consciousness and not become dependent on the machine, but raise your consciousness. And this is part of the whole system that you already do by meditating, for example, and going, cleaning up the system and not being dependent on necessarily what the media says, what this says, what that says, but try to go back to that original consciousness. So that is a huge field of thinking and studying and researching and analyzing. I think we just looked at the tip of the iceberg, and I look forward to having the ability to be with you more and think more and analyze more. Such a great mind. Thank you for being with us. Would you like to say anything more? Because we agreed on 1 hour, and I don't want to take more time.
I'm grateful for you to keep it to that, because I do still get very, very tired, even though I don't have the really bad chronic fatigue anymore. And an hour is, and I can't not, be energetic. I just fail if I try.
You're wonderful. You're absolutely delightful.
But we've raised a lot of interesting questions there, which I've enjoyed thinking about, and I will go on thinking about them. I'm going to go out in the garden now, where I'm growing all the vegetables, and wander around out there in the rain, probably, in the cold, and think about some of these questions. And so you push me to think deeper, and I guess that's what we want to do, isn't it? To push harder.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly got troubles with your views, and so
yes, because they haven't been elaborated really fully, but it's just a starting point.
Indeed, it is a very interesting starting point. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you. Wonderful. Great. All the best.
And to you. Bye-bye.